Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. Today, I'm going to be doing my bracket predictions for the Eastern region for the Kickoff Clash. If you did not see yesterday's video, I did my Western region bracket. You can see it here. Whoop, spoilers! So if you want to see my whole bracket and my reasonings behind it, go check out that video from yesterday. I'll link it in the description as well as in the cards and at the end of this video. But today we're going to do the Eastern region, a much smaller tournament this time around. The Western region has 8 teams in it. This one is only half as many, with only 4 teams playing in this tournament. So that's why this tournament starts a day later, starting tomorrow on Friday. In the early hours of the morning, if that is something that interests you. But yeah, we have a few matches to take a look at here. This tournament cycle, of course, 4 teams. The Hangzhou Spark were the 1 seed. They chose the Philadelphia Fusion, and the Seoul Dynasty were then left to play the Shanghai Dragons, and the Dragons are the 2 seed. So I think this tournament is really interesting. These are really close matches. We obviously have seen all of these teams in this region play. So whereas in the Western region you have some questions because we haven't seen, for example, the Shock and the Fuel play. We have seen the Spark and the Fusion, and the Dynasty and the Dragons and the Spark, and the Dynasty and the Fusion. We've seen all of the different combinations of these matches happen already this season, and so it'll be interesting to kind of see what happens this time around if we have different results, potentially. So that will be fun. But the first round games are especially interesting because both of these matchups are also the last matchups these 2 teams had. So we don't have to go back that far to see what these teams were able to do in their last matchup. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go the same way as it did last time, but we don't have to look back super far. Like, we don't have to look back at, week 1 like we did with, say, Atlanta and Florida, who played in week 1 this season, and will match up again in this tournament. These are their last matches. Now, to be fair, the Fusion and the Dragons had both come off 4 straight matches in 4 days when they played these opponents. Now, the Dragons beat the Dynasty the last time, and the Fusion did not beat the Spark. So that could have had some impact on things, different impacts, potentially positive, negative, whatever. But really, this is kind of, I think, an interesting tournament. We've already seen all these matchups happen before, so we kind of can use that to kind of guess where these matches will go because we have that evidence. So let's stop with this long ramble and let's just get into talking about these games. So the Fusion Spark is going to be the first match of the tournament, and the first of the 2 matches on Friday. I think you have to look at this matchup pretty interestingly because really these are 2 teams in very similar positions. You have these teams with all-star, incredibly talented and really good-looking rookie flex DPS players, or hit projectile DPS, whatever you want to call them. Obviously, the Fusion with Zest and the Spark with ATVI. Both of those 2 players have looked really, really good so far this season. You have young hit-scan talent as well that are looking very good with MN3 on the Fusion and Shy on the Spark. Obviously, Fusion also have Carpe, but he doesn't play as much. You have some kind of really solid tank play from both of these teams, and some pretty young support lines. Obviously, Aim God's been around for a while, but kind of some young players in that support line of both these teams that really kind of has this very, very, very interesting kind of look to them. So these are really interesting rosters, I think, but I've been really impressed by the Spark so far this season in ways I didn't really expect to. They're coming in as the number 1 seed. They're not necessarily the favorites, but they're definitely a team with that was the number 1 seed for a reason. The Fusion, to me, even though I had them ahead of the Spark in the power rankings, I think one of the problems with the Fusion is that they just seemingly have not had that same level of coordination and consistency. Carpe has a very important place in this roster, I think, because he is in many ways a leader. I think he knows how to call better than MN3 does, someone who's kind of a rookie to this league. But I think MN3 has looked a little bit better on hit scan heroes. Now, it could also be just where the teams are more comfortable in certain maps, and that doesn't necessarily, it's too early to really kind of take away from that, especially when Carpe has not had as much playtime, though that is obviously relevant as well. But I think you have to favor the Spark in this matchup. Obviously, they won the last time these 2 teams played. I think it'll be close. I'm going to say a 3-2. I don't think the Fusion are going to roll over easily. They can play to their strengths. They can pick maps that they're good at, that favor the way they play, stuff like that. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how these teams play, but I'm going to go with the Spark for this one because I think right now they have just looked better. It's the safer pick, I think, but I think right now it is also the more logical and more likely pick, and so I'm going to go in that direction of the Spark. Now, the Dynasty and the Dragons did play recently. They played this past weekend, and it was a 3-1 victory for the Dragons. It's definitely a match that has potential to be pretty good. I don't know exactly where these two teams will be now that they've had some time off. Of course, matches on Sunday from this past weekend, I think you can kind of give a bit of an asterisk on those games because of how long how many matches some of these teams played over time. A team like Shanghai played 4 games in a row. Obviously, they won the game, but even Seoul played 3 games. That's still a lot of matches in a weekend, and that can be a pretty difficult thing to do. So I think this weekend will be very different with these games because this is the first game these teams are playing this weekend, and so we'll kind of get to see where these teams are at. My point is that this game could go either way. I don't think that what happened on Sunday is necessarily indicative of where these two teams are going to be. I think that the Shanghai Dragons have had some issues this season with the way that they've played, with the kind of adapting to the single tank mentality. Obviously, this team was very, very good in double tank. When you had Fate and Void, who are 2 of the best at their role, it is a very easy thing to kind of understand why they have kind of struggled, in a sense, to transition to a single tank. I don't think the Dynasty have had as much of an issue with that. I think Smurf has looked really good as the season progressed, and even against the Dragons, I think he still looked pretty solid. He wasn't necessarily carrying or anything like that, but he looked really good. Prophet and Fitz, of course, back in action as always. It's going to be interesting to kind of see where they are at in this tournament cycle, because playoff Prophet could be alive and well, but they haven't really had a ton of tournament success over the past couple of years. Obviously, 2020, they almost beat Shanghai in the May Melee, and then they made the grand finals, but other than that, they've been pretty lackluster in their tournament appearances. So I'm definitely interested in this matchup. I think it's a very, very, very fascinating game. And I think it's probably going to be closer than it was before. I think it's a 3-2, especially when you have the ability to choose maps. But I'm going to give the edge to the Shanghai Dragons. I think they've looked better in those clutch map 5 situations. They have won every map 5 they've played so far this season. Whereas you look at a team like the Valiant, they have not. But Shanghai, when it comes to those clutch moments, they're able to close it out in those kind of close series. And so I think you have to give the edge to the Dragons. Once again, I think it's a safer pick. I think this one is much closer than the Fusion versus Spark one is. I think the Spark should be pretty heavily favored, or it's not heavily favored. Let's say the Spark match is like 55-45. The Dynasty Dragons match is way more like a 51-49. It is much closer together. These two teams are both very, very competitive, both very, very good. But who is the better of the two, we'll see for sure this weekend. And I think it'll go the way of the Dragons, but not 100% positive. Next match will be the first match on Saturday, which is the Fusion Dynasty elimination game, if that is, of course, how the bracket goes. When these two teams played before, it was not very close. Dynasty kind of rolled over the Fusion. I feel pretty good about the Dynasty, honestly, all things considered. I think that there is a bit of a gap between the top 3 with the Dragons, the Spark, and the Dynasty, not necessarily in that order. And then the Fusion. I think the Fusion are definitively the 4th best team in this region. I think there's a gap between them and the next best team, which is maybe the Valiant, maybe the Hunters, who knows exactly. I think there's a definitive top 4 in this region, and then there's the rest. But I still think that the Dynasty look somewhat significantly better, and so right now I would give the edge in this one to a Dynasty team that I just think have looked more consistently strong and have looked overall to be a better, stronger, more well-rounded team. That leaves the winners finals, which is the Hangzhou Spark versus the Shanghai Dragons. These teams played, of course, earlier this season. It was a 3-2 close series. One that the Spark probably should have won, but they didn't, which is kind of awkward, but C'est la vie. It happens. You win some, you lose some. You can't win every game as much as you would love to. No, I guess the Shock would say you can win every game because I win every game. This is going to be an interesting one. I think it's going to be close again. I think it's going to be a 3-2 again. Don't necessarily think that means that because the Dragons have been better in those map 5s that they are guaranteed to win, but let's just put ourselves in this position of a map 5 kind of situation. I think that this will come down really to how the teams choose to counter each other in those map picks. The Dragons, in a way, have looked better when Fate has been playing, though they haven't looked bad with Void. I think they've looked better in a lot of cases with Fate playing. They definitely tried to interact and integrate Void into the roster more and have it work a little bit better. And I think the Spark will look better when Bernard is in. So the Spark, I think, will tend to favor maps where they can play a lot more Zarya, as the team looks better there. And then the Dragons have looked better when they get to play the Winston. Now, unlike some matches where you would feel like, okay, well, maybe you don't have like a good backup or, a good answer in that other case, right? So even if the Spark have to play a Winston map where they don't feel as good, they still have Gushui, who's an incredible Winston, and when the Dragons have to play a Zarya map, they still have Void, who's an incredible off-tank, an incredible Zarya. So I think it's going to be a really interesting dynamic between how these teams kind of counter each other and how they kind of pick against each other. I think that'll be one of the most interesting things to see. So I'm curious to kind of see where that goes with this match in particular, because these are two teams that I think have very clear kind of style differences. They both have excellent Genji players. They both have really good hit-scan DPS players. I think this is going to be one of the best matches of the weekend if we could get this matchup, which I think we will. I think it's almost guaranteed this matchup happens, if not here in the finals. I think these are two teams that are pretty much on a crash course of the finals. I think we might get this matchup twice. Spoilers. Potential spoilers. But I am going to go the direction of the Shanghai Dragons. Partially because I think they just are more clutch. They've shown more clutch. Also because I kind of want to see the Spark and the Dynasty play again. And so for that reason, I kind of want to pick the Dragons. I think that you have to kind of feel like the Dragons right now look to be in a better position. I think they have been pretty consistent in a number of ways. There are things about them that I'm not 100% sold on, I'm a little concerned about, but by and large, I think when you have players as talented as the Dragons, and you have a Dragons team that have won countless tournaments, or not countless tournaments, but numerous tournaments, they've been pretty successful, all things considered this season. I think you kind of have to feel like they are one of the teams you feel pretty good about potentially winning this series. So I'm going to give it to them. And like I said, I want to see the Spark play the Dynasty again, because they played weak. The first game of the season for both of these teams was against each other. I think the Dynasty have improved a lot since that match. I think that they looked somewhat weak then. That was when I think Smurf looked his worst this season, was against the Spark in that first matchup. I think this is going to be a much closer series than it was the first time these two teams played. I think it's going to be a 3-2. Who wins, though? Well, that's up in the air a little bit, But I think no matter what, the Shanghai Dragons will get a rematch, because that's what happens when you only have 4 teams. You're pretty much guaranteed to get a rematch, since the Fusion make a lower bracket run. I think this will be a pretty interesting series if these two teams end up against each other, which I think is probably likely to happen at least at one point. Well, maybe not likely, but I think could happen somewhere in this tournament. I think it's one of those things where it's always going to be interesting to watch two teams that are really kind of second fiddle play. We still feel pretty good about the Shanghai Dragons. We still feel like they're probably the best team in the region. So when you have two teams like Seoul and Hangzhou, which have just looked pretty solid and pretty consistently good, but both of these two teams, right, have struggled against the Dragons. They both lost to the Dragons, and the Dynasty lost to the Spark. And so it's going to be an interesting kind of game to see who is able to come out on top here. I think right now you have to feel a little bit better about the Spark. I think they are more dynamic in the DPS role. As good as Prophet is, I think with how meta Genji has been, I feel better about ATVI in that role. If the teams are going to go kind of Tracer potential compositions, then I definitely think you can give the edge to Prophet there. But in those Genji type metas, I think the Spark have just looked better. I think ATVI has looked a little bit more kind of flashy. And I think Bernard's Zarya is better than that of Smurf, because Smurf is typically a Winston play or whatever. In a Winston map, you may feel kind of Smurf versus Gouchwei is pretty close, but I think you could probably give the edge to Smurf there. But I think you kind of go with the way of the Spark, just because I think they have a little bit more meta flexibility. I think they're better on the Zarya, and it's pretty close on the Winston, and so it really kind of comes down to that DPS matchup, which right now I think Alpha Yi is pretty good. He's a bit of a gamer, so I think you kind of have to go that direction for that one. But boy, do I think this APAC region is going to have some banger games. I think there's one game so far I've picked that wasn't a 3-2. So, that's how I feel good about this region. So it set up a finals between the Shanghai Dragons and the Hangzhou Spark. Obviously, a lot of the same stuff I said in their previous matchup would apply here. I think it's tough to really favor the Hangzhou Spark when we haven't seen them find that success. So I do think the Dragons will win. I think it'll be pretty close. We'll go 4-2, much like I did for the finals in the Western region. I always feel like in a grand finals, it tends to go that kind of 4-2 direction way more than it goes that 4-3 direction. We don't really get a lot of 7-map finals. We get a lot of 4-1s, 4-2s in finals, because I think it's just there comes a point when you're down 3-2 or 3-1, and you can win that map, but it's like we still have to win 2 more maps, and sometimes that burden is just a little too big for some of these teams. I think Shanghai are just too experienced. They've been here, even Who Are You was a champion last year, even if he didn't play that much, right? And even if you want to go back as far as Apex, he was a champion then. Who Are You has won titles before. He knows how to perform in those big moments. Even if it's been a while since that happened, he still knows how to do that. Fate and Lee Jae-gon and Izayaki and Fleta and Lip have all done it as well. I think you have to go favor of the Dragons here. I still think they are probably the best team in this region. They just look pretty good. And so I think that it's going to probably be the Dragons that win this whole thing once again. But yeah, definitely going to be an interesting tournament. I think there's a lot of really good games here. I think this is going to be super close, a lot of them. I think the APAC region is very, very, very close in terms of the top 4 teams in particular. So it'll be interesting to see how this one goes. So I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this bracket. Let me know in the comments down below. If you agree, you disagree, whatever it is, love to hear from you down below. But that's going to be all for me for today. Hope you all enjoyed. Check out the video that I put out yesterday on the Western region if you did not, because those matches are happening today, baby. So if you haven't seen my bracket yet for the Western region, check that out. But that's going to be all for me for today. Hope you're all enjoying this Overwatch League season. I'm having a blast. Hopefully, content ramping up. Hopefully get some nice fun content for you guys in the break between the tournaments, so stay tuned for all that. But for now, that's all from me from today. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy, and until next time, bye.